It was just a Victorian-era family photo. When historians zoomed in on the mirror, everything changed. The photograph was discovered in a cardboard box at an estate sale in Baltimore, Maryland, in the autumn of 2019. The house, a narrow three-story Victorian row house in the historic Fells Point neighborhood, was being cleared after the death of its last occupant, an elderly woman named Helen Morrison, who had lived there alone for nearly 40 years. Her distant relatives, overwhelmed by the task of sorting through generations of accumulated belongings, had hired an estate sale company to handle the liquidation. Among the many boxes was a collection of old photographs, dozens of them dating from the late 19th century through the 1950s. Most were loose in shoeboxes, their subjects unidentified, their stories lost to time. But one photograph stood out. It was larger than the others, approximately 8 by 10 inches, mounted in an ornate gilt frame that had tarnished with age but still suggested quality and expense. The photograph showed a Victorian-era family posed formally in an elegantly furnished parlor. A distinguished-looking black man sat in an upholstered chair at the center, his posture erect and dignified. He wore a dark three-piece suit with a watch chain visible across his vest. Beside him stood a woman, her hand resting on his shoulder, wearing a high-necked dress with intricate lace detailing. 3 children were arranged around the couple, all dressed in their finest clothes, their faces solemn as was typical in Victorian photography. The room spoke of prosperity. Patterned wallpaper covered the walls, a Persian rug lay on the floor, and fine furniture filled the frame. Behind the family, mounted prominently on the wall, was a large ornate mirror with an elaborate carved wooden frame, its silvered surface reflecting the room and creating depth in the composition. The photograph was purchased for $15 by Dr. Raymond Chen, a professor of American history at Johns Hopkins University, who collected 19th century photographs of black families. Such images were rare and valuable as historical documents, providing insights into lives often excluded from mainstream narratives. Raymond brought his purchase back to his office and spent several minutes studying it, admiring the dignity of the subjects and the quality of the composition. He noted the photographer's mark embossed in the lower right corner, Bradford & Sons, Baltimore, 1885. He recognized the name. Bradford & Sons had been one of Baltimore's premier photography establishments, known for serving both white and black clientele. Raymond decided to create a high-resolution digital scan, a standard practice for preservation and detailed examination. He carried the photograph to the department's imaging laboratory, where sophisticated equipment could capture extraordinary detail. The scanner hummed as it worked, and minutes later a digital file appeared on the computer screen, crisp, clear, and ready for examination. Raymond saved the file, having no idea he was about to discover something that would change everything. Raymond opened the high-resolution scan in photo editing software and began examining it systematically. He zoomed in on the man's face first, studying the character lines around his eyes and mouth, evidence of a life lived with responsibility and determination. The woman's face held quiet strength, her eyes seeming to look directly at the viewer with intelligence. The children's expressions were serious, but their eyes held personality that transcended the formal pose. He examined the background details, the wallpaper pattern, the furniture, the gas lamp fixture on the wall. Each element spoke of a family that had achieved success and wanted it documented. Then he turned his attention to the mirror. At normal magnification, it simply showed a reflection of the opposite wall, perhaps a window, the photographer's equipment partially visible. But as Raymond increased the magnification, something caught his eye. In the reflection, barely visible in the mirror's upper left quadrant, was an image that didn't belong. It was dark, indistinct, but unmistakably human. Figures in what appeared to be a confined space below the parlor. He leaned closer to the screen, his heart beginning to race. He adjusted the brightness and contrast, trying to bring the reflection into sharper focus. The image became clearer. 2 people in what looked like a basement or cellar, partially obscured by shadows. One figure sat or crouched against a wall, while another stood nearby in an awkward, constrained position. And there, visible on the wrists of the seated figure, were what appeared to be metal restraints, shackles or chains that caught and reflected light. Raymond sat back, his hands trembling. The photograph was from 1885, 20 years after the abolition of slavery. What were people doing in chains in a Baltimore basement? His first thought was damage or manipulation, but the more he examined it, the more convinced he became the reflection was genuine, captured accidentally by the mirror and preserved for over a century. He spent 2 hours studying every pixel, taking screenshots, adjusting settings, making notes. The figures were black, he could tell from visible features and skin tone. They appeared young, possibly teenagers. The space was crude and unfinished, nothing like the elegant parlor where the family posed. His mind raced with possibilities. Baltimore in 1885 was complex, officially Union during the Civil War, but with divided loyalties, and a long history of both slavery and free black communities. The city had been crucial to the Underground Railroad before the war. But in 1885, slavery was over, wasn't it? Raymond knew enough to understand that legal abolition hadn't meant the end of exploitation. Systems of convict leasing, debt peonage, and worse had replaced slavery in many places. But people in chains, in a Baltimore basement, in a house belonging to a prosperous black family? He grabbed his phone and called Dr. Adrienne Baptiste, a historian specializing in African American history and the Underground Railroad. "Adrienne," he said urgently, "I need you to come to my office right now. I found something impossible, and I need your help understanding what I'm looking at." Adrienne arrived within an hour, having rearranged her schedule when she heard the urgency in Raymond's voice. She was a striking woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked natural hair and sharp, perceptive eyes. Raymond had already printed high-resolution sections of the photograph, including the crucial mirror reflection detail, and spread them across his desk. "Show me," Adrienne said without preamble, setting her bag down. Raymond handed her the printouts in sequence, the full photograph, then progressively tighter crops, showing the mirror and finally the basement reflection. She studied them in complete silence, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to dawning comprehension, and finally to something between excitement and dread. "Where exactly did you get this?" "Estate sale in Fells Point yesterday. Victorian family portrait, dated 1885. I was just scanning it when I noticed the reflection." He pulled up the full image on his computer. "Look at the family. Clearly prosperous, respectable. But in the mirror, reflecting what must be a basement below the parlor, there are two people in chains. In 1885. Adrienne leaned in, adjusting her glasses. "Raymond, there are several possibilities here, and we need to investigate all of them carefully. First, and this is what I hope, this could be evidence of Underground Railroad activity continuing after the war. Even though slavery was legally abolished in 1865, people were still being held illegally, particularly in border states. Some were held by former slaveholders who refused to acknowledge the war's end. Others were trapped in debt peonage or kidnapped and sold into illegal slavery in remote areas where federal authority was weak." Raymond nodded slowly. "So these people might have been runaways, and this family was hiding them?" "Exactly. That would explain the chains. They might have just escaped, and the family hadn't yet safely removed the restraints. Underground Railroad work didn't stop in 1865. It continued into the 1870s and even 1880s. Baltimore was a major hub for this, and many families kept operating after the war." Adrienne paused, her expression troubled. "But there's another possibility, much darker. There were cases of black families who had achieved prosperity being coerced to participate in exploitation. Through threats, economic pressure, or because the system was so pervasive they couldn't escape it. I'm not saying that's what we're looking at, but we can't rule it out until we know who this family was." The possibility hung heavy between them. Raymond wanted to believe in heroism and resistance, but Adrienne was right. They needed evidence, not assumptions. "How do we start?" Raymond asked quietly but firmly. Adrienne was already on her tablet. "The photographer's mark, Bradford and Sons, 1885. Studios kept meticulous records. If Bradford's records survived, we'll have a name. Then we trace the family through census records, city directories, property records, church registries, everything." She looked up, serious and determined. "This will take weeks, maybe months. But if this shows what we think, Underground Railroad activity 20 years after the war, or illegal slavery in a major city, it's one of the most important historical documents we'll ever work with. Those people in chains deserve their story told, and this family's story needs to be understood." Raymond looked back at the photograph, the dignified family, the elegant room, and the barely visible reflection of two people in chains in a dark basement. Then let's find out who they were, all of them. The Maryland Historical Society occupied an imposing stone building in Baltimore's Mount Vernon neighborhood. Raymond and Adrienne arrived early on a cold November morning to meet Donald Peters, a retired archivist who had spent 40 years at the society. Donald greeted them warmly in the entrance hall, a slight man in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and the stooped posture of someone who'd spent decades bent over documents. "I pulled everything from Bradford and Sons," Donald said, leading them to the climate-controlled archives. "The collection is incomplete. A fire in 1902 destroyed much of their early work. But we have several ledgers from the 1880s, including the complete 1885 commission book." He brought them to a research table where 3 leather-bound ledgers lay, pages yellowed and brittle. "These are commission books. Every photograph was recorded. Date, client name, type of portrait, price, sometimes notes about special requests." Adrienne pulled on cotton gloves and carefully opened the 1885 ledger. Pages were filled with neat handwriting in faded brown ink. She began reading aloud. "Williams family, 4 persons. Parlor setting, $12. Thompson, single portrait. Outdoor setting, $5. They worked through winter months, then spring and summer. The afternoon stretched on, and Raymond felt excitement giving way to frustration. Then, on a page dated October 14th, 1885, Adrian suddenly stopped, her finger hovering over an entry. "Raymond," she said quietly, voice tight with emotion, "look at this." The entry read, "Freeman family, 5 persons, parlor setting with prominent mirror background, $18. Special commission, family requested privacy and evening appointment. Full payment received in advance." Raymond's pulse quickened. "Freeman, 5 persons. That matches our photograph. And $18 is significantly higher than standard rates. An evening appointment would be unusual and expensive, requiring extensive artificial lighting." "Very unusual," Donald confirmed. "Most sessions used natural daylight. Evening appointments required gas lamps or early electric lights, expensive and technically challenging. Requesting privacy suggests they had reasons for avoiding other clients or unnecessary staff." Adrian pointed to a small symbol in the margin, a tiny cross. "Donald, what does this mark mean?" Donald adjusted his glasses and smiled with recognition. "That's Bradford's notation for clients he considered trustworthy or sympathetic to progressive causes. I've seen it beside known abolitionist families, Quakers active in reform, and prominent black families involved in social justice work before and after the war." Raymond and Adrian exchanged glances, understanding the significance. If the Freemans were marked this way, Bradford considered them people of integrity, possibly involved in Underground Railroad activities. They spent hours in city directories from 1885, finding several Freeman families, but only one matching their criteria. Thomas Freeman, merchant and property owner, residing at 47 Lancaster Street in Fells Point, the same neighborhood where Raymond had found the photograph. "That cannot be coincidence," Raymond said, hands shaking as he took notes. Property records traced ownership back to 1882 when Thomas Freeman, free man of color, purchased it. The 1880 census provided crucial details. Thomas Freeman, age 38, black merchant. Clara Freeman, age 35. 3 children, Elizabeth, 12, James, 9, Sarah, 6. The family owned their home outright. "This is them," Raymond said with certainty. "Now we need to find out what was happening in that basement." Over the following weeks, Raymond and Adrian immersed themselves in research about Thomas and Clara Freeman in Baltimore in the 1880s. They needed to understand the world this family inhabited. While slavery had officially ended in 1865, reality for black Americans in border states was far more complicated and dangerous than legal documents suggested. Adrian found references to Thomas Freeman in Sharp Street Memorial United Methodist Church records, one of Baltimore's oldest black congregations, and a known center of abolitionist activity. Thomas had been active since the early 1870s, serving on committees and contributing to church programs. His name appeared frequently in contexts suggesting respect and trust. More significantly, Thomas appeared in private papers of known Underground Railroad conductors. One letter, dated July 1883, written by Reverend Morris Williams, caught Adriana's attention. "Brother Freeman continues the blessed work of our cause, though dangers grow greater each year. His house remains a sanctuary for the lost and the pursued. Those who flee from bondage that persists despite the law, may God protect him and his family as they risk all for righteousness." "The lost and the pursued," Raymond repeated. "That's Underground Railroad language. In 1883, 18 years after emancipation. Because freedom on paper didn't mean freedom in reality," Adrian explained. "People were still being held in bondage, sometimes by former slaveholders who refused to acknowledge the war's outcome, sometimes through debt peonage that was essentially slavery. Black people traveling alone could be kidnapped and sold into illegal bondage in remote areas. They found more evidence in Baltimore Association for the moral and educational improvement of colored people records. Meeting minutes from 1884 referenced safe houses that continue operating throughout the city, providing temporary shelter for those fleeing violence or illegal captivity, though operators face increasing danger. Thomas Freeman's house was one of those safe houses," Adrian said with conviction. "He and Clara were hiding people who needed protection, escaping illegal bondage, fleeing kidnappers at risk of re-enslavement. They visited 47 Lancaster Street, now a modern apartment building. The original Victorian row house was gone, demolished in the 1960s, but they found architectural survey records from the 1950s documenting the house before destruction. A 3-story brick row house with a distinctive bay window and a basement with exterior access via a small door at street level, partially hidden by stairs. That's how they moved people in and out," Adrian said. "Middle of the night, someone could slip down those stairs unseen." They knocked on doors in the neighborhood. An elderly black man named Thomas Washington, in his late 80s, remembered family stories. "My grandfather talked about a Freeman family on this street, way back. Said they were respected, successful, but also helped folks in trouble. He never said exactly what kind of help, but I understood it was dangerous, brave." Raymond showed him the photograph. The old man studied it carefully. They looked dignified, like people who knew what they were doing was right, even if dangerous. I hope you find out the whole story. They all deserve to be remembered. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later from an unexpected source. Adrian had posted a query on an Underground Railroad history genealogy forum asking about Thomas Freeman or Baltimore safe houses in the 1880s. She received a message from Beverly Thompson in Philadelphia, researching her own family history. Beverly explained that her great-great-grandfather, Samuel Carter, had been involved in Underground Railroad work in Maryland and Pennsylvania during and after the Civil War. After his death in 1923, his personal papers were preserved, including a detailed journal from 1870 to 1890 documenting his work helping people escape illegal bondage. "I've been transcribing the journal," Beverly wrote, "and I found references to T.F. in Baltimore who provided shelter. Based on your description, I think T.F. is Thomas Freeman. And I have an entry from October 1885 that might be relevant." Adrian called Beverly immediately. Within 2 days, scanned journal pages arrived. The handwriting was challenging but legible with patience. The entry from October 10, 1885 read, "Received word from T.F. in Baltimore that 2 souls arrived at his house 2 nights ago, having escaped from a farm in southern Maryland, where they'd been held in illegal bondage nearly 2 years. A brother and sister, ages 16 and 14, bearing marks of their captivity. T.F. reports they're in poor health but strong in spirit. He'll shelter them until arrangements can be made for transport north." Raymond read aloud, voice shaking. October 10th, 1885, 4 days before the Freeman portrait. The timing is perfect. October 13th. T.F. writes, "The situation is precarious. Slave catchers came to Fells Point yesterday, searching houses and questioning residents. They had descriptions of the 2 escapees and offered rewards. T.F. and Clara acted with composure, concealing the siblings and presenting themselves as a respectable family. The searchers didn't find the basement hiding space, but T.F. fears they'll return." Then October 15th. T.F. commissioned a family portrait yesterday as both precaution and symbolic declaration. He said, if his family is to be targeted by those perpetuating slavery's evil, he wants a permanent record of who they are and what they stand for. The photograph is his declaration to history that his house is a place of freedom. The 2 young people remain safe. I'm arranging their transport to Philadelphia within the fortnight. Adrian had tears streaming down her face. He knew what he was doing. That photograph wasn't just a family portrait. It was a declaration of purpose, a testimony. And now we're seeing not just his declaration, but evidence of exactly who he was protecting. Samuel's journal continued tracking Daniel and Ruth, the siblings' names. October 22nd. The 2 successfully transported to Philadelphia last night. Arrived safely this morning. I've arranged temporary lodging. Daniel shows aptitude for carpentry, Ruth for needlework. Both are profoundly grateful to T.F. and his family. An 1887 entry included, "Letter from Daniel, now 18 and employed as apprentice carpenter. He writes that he and Ruth will never forget the Freeman family who risked everything. He keeps the memory of that Baltimore house in his heart as a reminder that goodness exists, even in darkest times." Raymond sat back, overwhelmed. We know who they were now. Daniel and Ruth, brother and sister, 16 and 14, held in illegal slavery and rescued by the Freemans. And we have proof, Adrian added. Primary source documentation. This isn't speculation, it's history. Raymond and Adrian spent weeks tracing the Freeman family forward from 1885, discovering what became of Thomas, Clara, and their children. What emerged was simultaneously inspiring and heartbreaking, revealing both courage and the terrible price paid for their principles. The first discovery came from Baltimore newspaper archives. In June 1888, a brief article appeared. Merchant's home vandalized. The residence of Thomas Freeman, a colored merchant on Lancaster Street, was broken into Sunday night by unknown assailants. Windows were shattered, furniture destroyed, threatening messages left on walls. Mr. Freeman declined comment. Police are investigating. No follow-up articles, no arrests. But Adrian found a letter from Reverend Williams dated June 1888, far more explicit. Brother Freeman's house was viciously attacked 3 nights ago by a mob connected to slave catching or sympathetic to illegal bondage. The assault was brutal, punishment and warning. Every ground floor window shattered, furniture destroyed, threatening messages painted in the parlor warning the Freemans to cease activities or face worse, including explicit threats against Clara and the children. Thomas wasn't home, which likely saved his life, but Clara and the children were terrorized. Thomas is shaken but resolute. I fear greatly for their safety. Property records showed Thomas and Clara sold 47 Lancaster Street in February 1889, 8 months after the attack, taking a financial loss, suggesting desperation. The 1890 census located them in West Baltimore in a smaller house, suggesting forced downsizing to escape danger. Thomas continued his business, but there were no further references to safe house activities. The 1888 attack had apparently ended the Freemans' Underground Railroad work, at least publicly. Thomas Freeman died in 1902 at age 60. His obituary in the Baltimore Afro-American was respectful. Thomas Freeman, aged 60, respected merchant and longtime church member, passed away Tuesday. Freeman was known as a successful businessman, devoted husband and father, and a man who dedicated his life to the welfare of his people, survived by wife Clara and 3 adult children. No mention of Underground Railroad activities. Such acknowledgement remained dangerous even in 1902. But the phrase, dedicated his life to the welfare of his people, suggested some understood what he'd done. Clara Freeman lived until 1921, remaining active in church and becoming known for charitable work, particularly helping newly arrived black migrants during the Great Migration. She died at 76, her obituary describing her as a pillar of the community and a woman of remarkable strength. The 3 children, Elizabeth, James, and Sarah, all lived successful lives. Elizabeth became a teacher, James took over the business, Sarah married and moved to Washington, D.C. All had children and grandchildren. Through genealogical databases, Raymond and Adrian traced descendants to the present. They located Marcus Freeman, a 67-year-old retired engineer in Silver Spring, Maryland, great-great-grandson of Thomas and Clara. When Adrian called, explaining their research, there was long silence before Marcus spoke, voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. My grandmother told stories about Thomas and Clara being respected people, but never mentioned the Underground Railroad. I don't think she knew. It was dangerous knowledge, Adrian explained gently. Even decades later, people kept it secret to protect themselves and families. Marcus agreed to meet. When he saw the 1885 photograph, he wept. They were heroes. They risked everything to help strangers. And I never knew. How many other stories are lost? Too many, Raymond replied. That's why we're doing this. To recover these stories, honor these people. Marcus looked up, determined. I want to help find Daniel and Ruth's descendants. I want everyone to know what Thomas and Clara did. With Marcus Freeman's support, the search for Daniel and Ruth's descendants intensified. Samuel Carter's journal had provided first names, approximate ages, and that they settled in Philadelphia, but tracing them required painstaking genealogical work. Enslaved people often changed names for safety, making research extraordinarily challenging. Adrian focused on Philadelphia directories and census records from 1890 and 1900, searching for Daniel and Ruth, matching the right age range. Listed as black, born in Maryland. She cross-referenced with church records, employment records, and marriage licenses. She found a promising lead in Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church records, one of Philadelphia's oldest black churches with a history of supporting formerly enslaved people. Membership rolls from November 1885 listed Daniel Carter and Ruth Carter, recent arrivals from Maryland. The surname Carter caught Adrian's attention. Samuel Carter might have given them his name as protection. This wasn't uncommon. Conductors sometimes adopted refugees into extended family networks, providing names and fictive kinship for legal and social protection. She found Daniel Carter in the 1900 census. Age 31, born Maryland around 1869, occupation carpenter, living in South Philadelphia with wife Mary and 3 children. Ruth appeared as Ruth Morrison, age 29, married to John Morrison, living in West Philadelphia with 2 children, occupation seamstress. But the real confirmation came from an unexpected source. The Historical Society of Pennsylvania held oral histories recorded in the 1930s as part of a WPA project, documenting formerly enslaved people's experiences. Among these was an interview with elderly Ruth Morrison, conducted in 1936. Adrian obtained the recording and listened with Raymond and Marcus present. Despite poor audio quality, Ruth's voice came through clearly, speaking with a Philadelphia accent occasionally revealing southern cadences. The interviewer asked about early life. Ruth's response sent chills through the room. I was born on a farm in southern Maryland. My mama died when I was young. Me and my brother Daniel were taken by a white man who said he was our guardian, but he kept us like slaves, made us work dawn to dark, beat us. This was after the war, after slavery was supposed to be over, but nobody came to check. Nobody cared about 2 colored children in the middle of nowhere. She continued. When I was 14 and Daniel 16, we ran away. Walked 3 days, hiding during daylight, traveling by night. We made it to Baltimore, and someone told us about Thomas Freeman, who helped people like us. We went to his house, a big brick house on a narrow street, and his wife Clara opened the door and took us in without questions. They hid us in their basement almost 2 weeks, fed us, gave us clean clothes, treated our wounds. Mr. Freeman got word to people in Philadelphia, and one night they put us on a train north. Ruth's voice became emotional. I never forgot that family. Never forgot how they risked everything for 2 children they didn't know. Mr. Freeman told me before we left, "You're free now, child. Live a good life, and remember there are people who will help you, who stand up for what's right." I carried those words my whole life. The recording ended. No one spoke for a long moment. Marcus was weeping openly. The connection between photograph, journal entries, and Ruth's voice had created a complete narrative, proof of courage, compassion, and the long struggle for freedom. With Ruth Morrison's oral history as confirmation, they traced her descendants forward. Ruth lived until 1944, dying at 73. Through genealogical work, they located 3 living great-great-grandchildren. 2 women in Philadelphia, a man in New York. One, Diane Jackson, a 58-year-old social worker in North Philadelphia, agreed to meet. When Adrienne explained their discovery, Diane was stunned. I knew great-great-grandma Ruth came from Maryland, that she'd escaped bad circumstances. But nobody explained what or gave details. I had no idea people were still enslaved in the 1880s. Raymond showed her the photograph, pointing out the reflection. That's Ruth and her brother Daniel in the Freeman basement in October 1885, waiting to be taken to safety. Diane stared, tears streaming. Her teenage daughter Jasmine leaned in. She was my age, 14, in chains, running for her life. She survived because of the Freemans, Marcus said, taking Diane's hand. Your great-great-grandmother was saved by my great-great-grandparents. That connection binds our families across 135 years. Diane gripped his hand. Thank you for making sure Ruth and Daniel aren't forgotten, that the Freemans aren't forgotten. This matters so much. Over the following months, the extended families connected in ways that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Marcus became family historian on the Freeman side, reaching out to relatives, sharing the photograph and research, watching the story spread through the family network. Many had never known the full truth about Thomas and Clara, and learning about their courage created profound pride mixed with sorrow for what had been lost to silence. Diane performed a similar role for Ruth Morrison's descendants, connecting with relatives across Philadelphia, New York, and other cities. She located Daniel Carter's great-grandson in Atlanta, James Carter, 65, a retired postal worker overwhelmed when he learned about the photograph. James had known Daniel came from Maryland and experienced hardship, but specific details had never been passed down. Plans were made for a reunion in summer 2020, to be held in Baltimore near where 47 Lancaster Street once stood. Representatives from both families would gather to honor the Freeman's courage and celebrate Daniel and Ruth's survival. The photograph would be displayed with Samuel Carter's journal, Ruth's oral history, and other documentation. But the COVID-19 pandemic struck, forcing postponement. Instead, families organized a virtual ceremony via Zoom on October 14, 2020, exactly 135 years after the photograph was taken. More than 60 people participated from across the United States: Freeman descendants, Morrison, Carter descendants, historians, church representatives, and community members. Raymond and Adrienne presented detailed research findings using screen share to display the photograph, enhanced mirror reflection, and archival documents. The presentation took 40 minutes, participants watching in rapt attention. Marcus Freeman spoke afterward. My great-great-grandparents could have looked away. They could have said it was too dangerous. They had their own children to think about. But they didn't. They saw 2 children in desperate need and acted. They opened their home, put themselves at risk, and saved 2 lives. That's the legacy they left. Standing up, helping, putting humanity above fear. I'm so proud to be descended from Thomas and Clara Freeman. Diane Jackson held up a printed photograph. Ruth carried the memory of that Baltimore house her entire life. She told her children about the family who saved her, and they told their children, and now we're telling ours. This photograph proves that even in darkest times, some people chose light. Even when dangerous, some chose what was right. We're all here because of that choice. Ruth and Daniel survived, built lives, raised families. Their descendants are scattered across this country, living and thriving. Because 135 years ago, Thomas and Clara Freeman opened their door. Jasmine Jackson, 18, spoke for the youngest generation. When I first learned about Ruth and Daniel, I was their age. I couldn't imagine surviving what they survived or having the courage to escape. And I couldn't imagine the Freemans' courage, opening their home knowing they could be attacked or killed. But that's my history, our history, and I'm proud to carry it forward. The ceremony concluded with silence, 60 people honoring those who came before. When it ended, there were tears, shared stories, and promises to stay connected. The photograph remained in Raymond's collection, but was loaned to museums. Adrienne began a scholarly article for the Journal of African American History. Marcus and Diane collaborated on a book for general readers. In October 2021, when restrictions eased, the in-person reunion finally happened. More than 50 descendants gathered in Baltimore at a small park near 47 Lancaster Street's former site. A historical marker was unveiled, funded by both families and historical organizations. The bronze plaque read, "On this site stood the home of Thomas and Clara Freeman, who operated a safe house for people escaping illegal bondage in the 1880s. The Freemans risked their lives and their children's safety to provide shelter and hope. Among those they helped in October 1885 were Daniel and Ruth Carter, teenage siblings who escaped forced labor in southern Maryland. This marker honors the Freemen's courage and all who fought for freedom after slavery's legal abolition. The photograph and its story were eventually featured in a major exhibition at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Hidden in plain sight, the Underground Railroad. After emancipation opened in fall 2022, immediately drawing enormous crowds. Lines wrapped around the building on weekends, and advance tickets had to be reserved weeks ahead. The Freeman portrait was the centerpiece, displayed in a climate-controlled case with specialized lighting allowing visitors to see the haunting mirror reflection from the correct angle. The exhibition design was thoughtful and powerful. Visitors entered through a corridor explaining how slavery's 1865 abolition hadn't ended various bondage forms. Statistics and maps documented convict leasing, debt peonage, child apprenticeship systems, and outright kidnapping continuing into the 20th century. Personal testimonies, including Ruth Morrison's oral history, played on audio stations throughout. The Freeman photograph was displayed at eye level in the main gallery, dramatically lit and enlarged. High-resolution reproductions of the mirror reflection, with Daniel and Ruth clearly visible, appeared on adjacent walls. Visitors could read Samuel Carter's journal excerpts, Reverend Williams' letter about the 1888 attack, and census records corroborating the story. Contemporary descendant photographs showed the living legacy of that 1885 moment. Interactive touchscreens allowed exploration of the research process, tracking Raymond and Adriana's investigation from initial discovery through family identification and descendant location. Educational materials explained how to conduct similar research, encouraging visitors to explore their own family histories and look more carefully at old photographs for hidden stories. The exhibition attracted national and international media attention. Major newspapers ran features. Documentary filmmakers produced a PBS special featuring interviews with Raymond, Adrian, Marcus, Diane, and other family members. The photograph went viral on social media, shared hundreds of thousands of times with commentary about preserving history, slavery's ongoing impact, and individual courage against injustice. Schools nationwide began incorporating the Freeman photograph into curricula as a primary source for teaching about Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the long struggle for Black freedom. Teachers reported students were particularly engaged because it was simultaneously familiar, a family portrait, and a document of hidden resistance. The fact it had been hidden 135 years, visible but unseen in the mirror's reflection, made it a powerful metaphor for overlooked history. Raymond and Adrian co-authored The Mirror's Witness, Thomas and Clara Freeman, and the Hidden History of Freedom, published by a major academic press in 2023. The book provided comprehensive research accounts, historical context of post-emancipation bondage, and biographical chapters about the Freemans, Daniel and Ruth, and the broader Underground Railroad network continuing after 1865. It won awards and became required reading in many courses. They used book proceeds to establish the Freeman Morrison Scholarship Fund, providing financial support for descendants of Underground Railroad activists and post-emancipation bondage survivors pursuing higher education. Marcus and Diane served on the scholarship committee. The photograph remained in Raymond's collection, but was loaned extensively. A permanent high-resolution digital archive was created and made freely accessible online through the Library of Congress. The photograph became one of the most studied late 19th century historical images, cited in hundreds of scholarly works. Marcus Freeman became a public speaker, frequently discussing his great-great-grandparents and hidden history's importance. He worked with schools, sharing the story and encouraging students to investigate their own histories. He never tired of seeing young people's faces as they understood what the image revealed. Diane integrated the story into her social work, using it as an example of resilience and helping others despite difficulty. She worked with at-risk Philadelphia youth, finding Ruth Morrison's survival story and the Freeman's courage resonated powerfully with young people facing challenges. The photograph became a teaching tool connecting past and present. Every October 14th, descendants gathered to commemorate the photograph's anniversary, sharing stories, honoring ancestors, and renewing commitment to courage, compassion, and justice values. New generations learned the story, children who would carry it forward. The photograph had become far larger than Thomas and Clara could have imagined. They had wanted to create a record, a testament to their principles. The accidental mirror reflection, capturing Daniel and Ruth in vulnerability, had preserved evidence making their testimony undeniable and extraordinarily powerful. Thomas and Clara Freeman posed for a simple family portrait in 1885, seeking to document their dignity despite danger. The mirror captured something more, evidence of extraordinary courage, Daniel and Ruth's survival, a bridge across 135 years. Their story, once hidden in a barely visible reflection, was now known and honored. And it would continue inspiring as long as people believed ordinary individuals, acting with courage and compassion, could change the world, one life, one choice, one moment at a time.